Welcome to the Los Angeles City Section Football Podcast. Week 0 is in the books. Let's look ahead to Week 1 and look back on the Week 0 matchups. But Alex, let's be honest, a really tough opening week for the Los Angeles City Section football teams. Birmingham was the only team to beat a Southern Section opponent, and it was pretty bleak.
Yeah, as you mentioned, top to bottom, Southern Section teams didn't have a lot of trouble against City Section teams. Narbonne went out to Hawaii. They played St. Louis. Frankly, the best team out there in the state of Hawaii, but they didn't really put up the fight that they wanted to. We saw San Fernando really kind of get rolled there by Alemany. Granada Hills, they're not in our top 10, but they lost 56-6 against Oxnard. Taft against Saugus had trouble. El Camino against St. Bonaventure.
Venice got routed at 2 against
Venice,
St. Paul.
St. Paul. So pretty much top to bottom, 1 through 10, everybody had some trouble. We got a new entrant in this week's top 10. We're going to talk about Eagle Rock a little bit, but for the most part, a very disappointing Week 0. And on that point, starting the season an extra week earlier, August 17th instead of last year, August 24th or whatever it was last year, that's tough for City Section teams. I wouldn't read too much here into Week 0. Things kind of have, they've yet to get going. Guys have yet to get healthy. Some of the transfers weren't totally cleared, so I would wait a couple of weeks to really make judgments, but certainly not a great start.
Yeah, and at the end of the year, last year, I thought there were 4 really standout teams in the LA City Section. Narbonne, of course, Crenshaw right there. Those are the 2 state champs. And then San Fernando ended the season really well. And Dorsey made big strides to where they were at the beginning of the year as well. So, again, yeah, it was tough first week, but you don't want to read too much into it. I don't know if this year transfers will have as big of an impact as they did last year. Narbonne, it will, but Crenshaw, I don't think they have too many transfers coming in. Dorsey, kind of the same thing. So we'll see about that. That was certainly a big reason why a lot of those teams fared very well. But on the other side of things, San Fernando, I don't think, had too many transfers either, and they ended up finishing the year really strong. So it's not about how you start, it's about how you finish, but these teams for sure started pretty poorly. So at number 10, we have Banning. They lost to Cathedral, which was expected. Cathedral, a Division IV team in the Southern Section. They have one prospect on defense who could go to USC, so really loaded squad there, and Banning just can't compete with that, and they go out and lose by a few scores, as we expected.
Yeah, Banning, I think they're a bit low here on our top 10 from where we might expect them to finish. We think they have a shot at the Open Division. At 10, they might be sandbagging just a little bit. I think their talent has yet to really come to play. The schedule's going to get a little bit tougher. They started off the season against Cathedral. They've got Los Alamitos later on the schedule, who I think might give them a tough time. But the key here for City Section, a lot of the schools they've now scheduled are Division IV in the Southern Section. So I think that's kind of your measuring stick. We're going to have to look at how some of these city teams, how do you play against the D4 of the Southern Section? We saw Sylmar play Crespi, Taft play Saugus, some of these other schools. Those are Division IV schools. So I think D4 is going to be the measuring stick, and not a great start there for Banning.
Yeah, well, so far, all the Division IV teams have really smoked the LA City Section teams, and I think a fair comparison might even be Division 7, Division 8, looking at teams like Milliken, teams like North Torrance, who beat City Section teams this week, and it was closer. San Pedro and Carson, they were in those games, but they both only put up 3 points, and again, closer, but I think the measuring stick, Division 4, I don't know.
That might be too high.
Unless you're Narbonne, I don't know who's beaten a Division 4 team, but so maybe Division 7 or 8 a little bit. Last year, I think you could have an argument that those games would be much closer, but this year might be a little bit different just because the City Section, there's a bit of a talent gap compared to where there was last year.
And I think we might see that reflected in the schedules next year. This year, maybe it was a bit of an overjudgment on the talent they have, because you see D4 teams scheduled all the way through the early parts of the season. So next year, maybe we'll see some Division 7, Division 8 scheduled. But for now, you got to play D4s, and you got to see how you can compete. If it's not a fair measuring stick, you will kind of see that translated towards next year. But for now, hey, you got to go out and play some football.
Absolutely. So at number 9, it's a new team, Eagle Rock. They destroyed Southgate 50-14 in the first week of play. So shout out to them. They got a win. I know it was against the City Section team, but still they're one of only 2 teams, I believe, who started the year in our top 10 with a victory. So Eagle Rock looks really good. They're off on the right foot. Their schedule is really easy, though, so I expect them to win. They should win 9 games. And if they go 10-0, then potentially an Open Division team, because remember, they're moved up into Division 1, but I expect them to be 9-1, 8-2, and make some noise in the D1 playoffs.
Yeah, I think really the only way they make it into the Open Division is if they beat Fairfax. They got Fairfax on the schedule a little bit later this year. If they beat Fairfax, and then maybe Fairfax takes a step back, because I do think Banning gets into that top 8. Eagle Rock's going to kind of have to fight to take one of those other teams out. I think some of the vulnerable teams at the bottom, it might be Crenshaw, maybe it's Fairfax, but if you really are serious, you moved up to Division 1 after being lower in Division 2 last year, so you moved up. If you want a shot at the Open, aside from going undefeated in league and winning some of these other non-league games, you got to go out and beat Fairfax.
I agree with you. At number 8, Dorsey Dons, they lost to Long Beach Poly 37-8. They play at Alemany this week, so I don't want to say it gets easier. Alemany is probably a little worse than Long Beach Poly, but still a really, really good opponent. As we saw, they destroyed San Fernando. So Dorsey, another tough game. I don't think we're going to see a repeat of last year where they didn't win for a long, long time. Eventually, I think they'll get a win. And the question this week will be, can they fare better than San Fernando did on the road against Alemany? I certainly hope so.
Yeah, San Fernando didn't really put up much of a fight. They lost 43-0 against Alemany, but here's the thing about Casey Clausen's Alemany Warriors. They got off to a bit of a slow start because a lot of kids over there are new. They weren't there last year, or they're sophomores playing varsity football for the first time. So Alemany, watch out for them. Once they get things clicking and actually turn into that football team that's firing on all cylinders, they're going to take some teams out. The key here for Dorsey, unfortunately, just score a touchdown. Because I think last week, San Fernando kind of had that tough time getting the offense going. Couldn't really move the ball into the red zone. Didn't really have a lot of possessions in that territory against Alemany. The key here for Dorsey, go out and score. They scored against Long Beach Poly last week, although it kind of was in the fourth quarter, some garbage time. I think the key here for them is go out and prove that if you might be a team kind of on that cusp of open division, because they missed out last year. So the key for them is to just kind of push through, maybe score against Alemany and kind of make some noise.
I think Dorsey is similar to San Fernando in the fact that the defense this year will probably be a little bit better than the offense. And I know when San Fernando gets everyone healthy, that rushing attack is great, but they struggle to throw the ball a little bit, San Fernando does. Dorsey is one and the same in that regard. And defensively, led by Kendall Hill, a senior linebacker, he is a real big-time player. I think Dorsey defensively, that defense needs to keep them in the game against Alemany for them to have any chance, but I'm not picking Dorsey that one. I'm sure you're not either, right?
Probably not. I saw Alemany kind of Miller Moss. We watched him last year at Loyola. The kid's a really, really good quarterback, only a sophomore. I mean, he really wasn't rushed. Even though the San Fernando Tigers have a really good defense, he didn't face a lot of rush, so I think he's going to do okay, and I would pick Alemany in that game.
I agree. At 7, Crenshaw, they're 0-1 as well. Got humbled against South Hills 38-6 because there was a lot of talk before that game. Yeah, we don't have a lot of guys returning, but we're Crenshaw. We'll be good. We'll be just fine. And they lose to South Hills. Remember, though, they lost to South Hills last year, so that was kind of a head-scratcher when that happened last year because Crenshaw didn't have a lot of the transfers. There were some question marks about who was going to be their quarterback. This year, though, they don't have those LA High transfers coming in, so I think this result is kind of expected, and we see them at number 7 now. They were number 5, moved down to number 7. They play West Covina next, who's a bad Southern Section team. If they don't win that game, I think that's going to be an issue, really, because you should be West Covina. You should.
Yeah, if they don't beat West Covina, I think that's a bit of a death knell. I think there's a little bit of insight into this program based on what people are saying on Twitter. They say it's a growing pain year for Crenshaw. Remember when we put out the top 10? People were upset that Crenshaw was only at 5. They thought maybe they were 2 or 3. This week we had them out down at 7, and people said, you know what? Maybe that's where we belong for right now. We're rebuilding. So I think this is going to be a telling year for the Cougars. It's a telling year all the way across LA City. How do these guys come back? How do these programs kind of restock the cupboards? Crenshaw, I think, is part and parcel of what's going on in LA City. And I think if they can kind of turn things around a little bit, get a morale boost win, who knows, maybe the season kind of turns a corner, but I'm really curious. I'm going to keep 2 eyes on Crenshaw this year.
In a couple of weeks, Crenshaw plays Fairfax, and that'll be a good measuring stick game within the LA City section. I'll be there. Alex, we're not sure where you'll be that week, but maybe we'll both be there. Who knows? But that's one I'm excited to take a look at. So at number 7, we had Crenshaw, then 6, Fairfax. Speak of the devil, that's who we have at 6. Don't really know much about them so far because they haven't played. Right. They're 0-0. They play Loyola this week, who's in the LA Times top 25. So that'll be really hard. Scott Harris, their quarterback, is returning, and he's a good player, so look for him to have a good year. But, that's, I think, a scheduling mistake, so to speak. I don't think Fairfax has a shot.
Well, a lot of these schools, they pick schools to play them where you grow up, right? Alemany and San Fernando, they're right down the street from each other. Loyola, Fairfax, they're close to the same neighborhood. Same with Dorsey, Long Beach Poly, kind of a farther drive, but still pretty close. You grow up playing these kids. These are the kids you played Pop Warner with, some of the guys you coached against. You know, families kind of go to 2 different schools. These games, while it's tough for city section teams, scheduling-wise, personnel-wise, coaching-wise, it's not quite going to stack up. I think there's still some value in going in and playing a big team like that because at the end of the day, kids are still going to make tackles against their buddies. They're still going to throw a touchdown pass here or there. These are our learning experiences, measuring stick games, so to speak, but Fairfax are probably going to lose.
Yeah, tough matchup for them. 5, Venice. I think they had the second worst loss out of anyone in the LA City section. in week 0 after San Fernando. They played St. Paul and just got destroyed 38-0. We had high expectations for the offense. I mean, Luca Diamant has an Alabama offer, their quarterback. Chad Ochocinco's son, Chad Johnson Jr., is a wide receiver for Venice. He has some offers as well. Makai Cope is a good receiver for them. I expected them to at least score anything at all. I expected them to maybe put up like 14 or somewhere in that low double-digit range, and to get zeroed like that, shut out, that's a bad look for them.
Yeah, St. Paul played them last year, beat them again, but Venice last year was actually to kind of put up a bit of a fight. I think they scored 2 or 3 times in that game. Maybe I'll chalk this one up to Diamant just having his first game since he was a sophomore, or a freshman rather.
Yeah, freshman.
Sophomore year, he was out all year with a head injury. So maybe this is just a bit of growing pains, not quite on the same page with some of his receivers. I know practice, I'm sure it was going really, really well. So this was not the result that they expected, but let's take this one with a grain of salt. St. Paul, obviously, kind of more healthier program at this point, but I think we'll see a bounce back from Diamant and company.
Well, they play against Harvard Westlake, and that's going to be a really good game to kind of measure up where this team is at versus Birmingham, because Birmingham is able to beat Harvard Westlake on the road. Venice will host Harvard Westlake, and we better see a better performance from them, because if they get blown out against Harvard Westlake, they may be out of the top 10 altogether.
Yeah, and that will really put a damper on their open division chances. I like we've said, I think 1 through 8, those are the biggest programs here in LA City. I think Venice belongs in that conversation, but you still got to go out and win football games, and here's a prime opportunity. And this game, believe you me, the selection committee will be talking about this performance against Harvard Westlake, because Birmingham went out and beat Harvard Westlake. So they already have a city section loss on the docket for them. So this is a big game for Venice.
Yeah, I agree with you. At number 4, San Fernando. Talked a little bit about them off the top. Got beat pretty bad, 43-0 against Alemany. They play at Canyon next, a team who hasn't played yet, so maybe that'll be an advantage for San Fernando. They've got one game under their system, although it was a tough loss. So I know they're a little banged up. They have some injuries. But still, we expected them after last season to be the number 2 team in the city. They have the players, and for them to come out and lose like that was a really bad look for them. I know it was 14-0 at halftime, so they were in the game, but I expected more from that offense, and it was almost non-existent, it sounds like.
Yeah, I mean, they expected more from that offense. Clearly, they were fired up for that game. They thought they had a real chance to win. And going through that first half, the San Fernando defense did a really, really good job. Alemany was not really clicking. They weren't moving the ball as well as they could have. They missed 2 extra points. The score was actually 12-0. Then Alemany
12-0. Okay.
12-0, but Alemany had 2 safeties to make it.
Got it.
They kind of closed that gap. They had 2 safeties in the game. One of the safeties put it to 14-0. So those kind of shots in the foot, you're not going to bounce back from those. I do think the defense is going to be best in the city here. I really do. I think there's a lot of really good kids here. We've talked a bunch about Javontrell Turner off the edge. They got Daniel Silva, Nehemiah Thompson in the linebacking core. So this is a good team. They had a really, really bad game, and they really kind of, I don't want to say they gave up, but they lost steam. When you kind of get beat a little bit towards the second half and you're not scoring any points and you're turning the ball over, you're going to lose some steam. San Fernando lost steam a little bit. I think they bounce back here. I don't know how Canyon is. I would still probably pick Canyon in this game just because I think San Fernando has a lot of things to work through in the passing game. The big one, Dorsey. 2 weeks from now, that's the big game. That's their home opener on September 1st, I believe. So that's going to be a huge game. Stands are going to be packed. That's the rematch of the Division I championship game last year. You know Dorsey's going to be talking smack. You know San Fernando's going to want to defend their honor. So that's a big, big game.
Yeah, and talking about that game for a second, I heard that the new Dorsey coach, Doug Bledsoe, he drove up to San Fernando and in person asked the San Fernando coaching staff, hey, we got to play each other. Do you have an opening? And they worked it out in person. So that was cool to see. At number 3, Carson, they also got off with a lost 7-3 against Milliken. And this was a game I wasn't able to attend, but I saw some recaps and just some people who were there. Carson should have won this game.
Yep.
They had more yards. They had the ball more often, so better time of possession. And Milliken just got that touchdown, and Carson only the field goal. So that was a tough game for them, and it's a home opener. Quick observation. Last season, I saw them play a non-league game against Westchester, and they were better than Westchester, but that game went into the fourth quarter, and sometimes Carson just gets off the slow starts, and that goes longer than just a slow start in a game. Sometimes they get off to slow starts during the season a little bit. We saw that a little bit last year, and so I think that was kind of why that they ended up losing this game to Milliken. I feel like if Carson played them, you kind of flip it a little bit, and they play him maybe in the league. I know they're not in the league, but at that time, the game would be different. But the first game of the year, Carson was just a little bit slow. Penalties. turnovers. Wasn't a pretty game. They lose.
Yeah, a couple of Marine League teams only able to muster some field goals against beatable teams.
Yeah.
Milliken obviously taking the game from Carson. Carson only able to kick one field goal, and I think that offense is going to score more points. They're defensive oriented, but Ja'Cory Moe is a really good running back. He's going to score some touchdowns. And then San Pedro, they lost to North Torrance. They only mustered a couple of field goals. They lost 7-6. Two very, very winnable games. Offense all the way around was kind of a tough showing.
I agree with you. And that San Pedro game, they had a pick 6, but it was called back. So sometimes, it's tough. But we have Carson at 3 because I think, although I'm criticizing them a little bit, they didn't get blown out like San Fernando and Venice did. And
you can see the talent. You can see that there's going to be plenty of things to work from.
I agree with you there. At 2, Birmingham, finally a team with a win. 1-0 on the year. They beat Harvard Westlake 30-21. They play LaSalle next, so they should get off to a 2-0 start. And then Agora, so maybe even 3-0. Birmingham, they're number 2, and I think that's where they belong right now. They're the only team who showed up, and until I see otherwise, they'll be number 2 for a little bit.
Yeah, I agree. I think that Jason Artiga, I mentioned him in my solo podcast last week. I got a question that asked me, who's your pick for the City Section Quarterback of the Year? Jason Artiga is going to put his name in the hat really early on. He had a really nice game last week against Harvard Westlake. Like you mentioned, some soft defenses to kind of pad your stats. You got LaSalle. Then you have Agora, who might...
Agora's good.
They're pretty good. They might kind of punch you in the mouth a little bit early, but Birmingham can certainly beat them. And I like Artiga. I like the receiving core they've got over there in Boarding House, some of the other guys. So I'm excited to see what Birmingham has.
Yeah, LaSalle, though, not very good. So I'd be surprised if Birmingham lost to them. They should be 2-0. Artiga is good. Quickly, just talking about some other quarterbacks. I mean, I think before the season started, people would say Diamond at Venice, and if Jake Garcia could play at Narbonne, I'm sure he would be a popular name. But Artiga's right up there, and then I think Scott Harris.
Scott Harris as well, yeah.
So if I had to pick right now, I don't know how it would work because Garcia's going to miss 5 games. So let's just say he's ineligible because he had to sit out. I think Artiga's right up there along with Scott Harris. Those would be the 2 front runners for me. Number 1, though, Narbonne went on the road to St. Louis, lost 47-7, and we all remember that game last year.
Yep.
It was a 1-score game. It was really close.
High scoring, too.
Yeah, I think like 47.
56-50.
Okay, 56-50, yeah. So very high scoring game. Narbonne was in it, and this year it's just a little bit different. They weren't in the game, couldn't move the ball on offense, and defensively they looked really bad. And they're going to get some transfers in. They'll get some guys who will come in and help them. But let's remember, a couple days before the season, Juwan Collins was cleared. I think Paul Edwards was
A lot of their
cleared.
big transfers were cleared.
So I don't really know why they played so poorly. Because I have high expectations for them. Going to need to see a much better performance against Long Beach Poly.
Yeah, well, I think like we've talked about with a lot of these other schools, week 0, it's a week earlier. If Narbonne has a tough time, a lot of the other schools, I think you could kind of draw comparisons across the city section and say everybody's going to have a hard time. These kids played training camp, yet to play a game, then they hopped on a plane, went all the way to Hawaii, and played a football game. So it's
against the 5th team in the nation.
Right,
too.
against one of the best teams in the United States.
It's not like St. Louis. Narbonne was maybe expected to beat them.
No, it's one of the premier programs in the entire country.
But again, we expected it to be closer.
You wanted it certainly because Narbonne, well, St. Louis was 5th in the country. Narbonne, I think, was 24th. So it's not like Narbonne was getting overlooked. There were plenty of people that really believe in this team. We still do. I think they're going to be our number 1, wire to wire.
Yeah.
They're probably going to be defending. They're going to return to the Open Division, probably win that. But I wouldn't read too much into this big loss. Obviously, you wanted to keep it close. You wanted to score more than a touchdown. You didn't want to give up the pile of points that you gave up. But we've still got a lot left to see. Some of the guys kind of got to get into their groove. I expect Narbonne to rattle off a couple of wins. Long Beach Poly, that's a big, big test.
And just quickly, after the game, Coach Manny Douglas was interviewed, and the talk in the offseason was, I don't really know who my quarterback's going to be. Yeah, Jake Garcia transferred in. He has a lot of high-profile offers, but Jalen Henderson's been playing really well for us, so, we'll see what happens. And then after the game, he said, well, my quarterback, Jake Garcia, he's got to sit out the first 4 or 5 games, whatever it is. And I don't want to say he threw Henderson under the bus, but he kind of made it seem like, my main guys, a lot of them haven't been here. And again, I don't want to say that was a bad look from him, but it was just unexpected because the talk in the offseason was, well, we have 2 pretty solid quarterbacks, but after that game, he made it sound like Garcia is going to, when he comes in, it'll be a lot better. And let's be honest, Henderson in that game, I saw a few of the highlights. He was hit a lot. He had some tough interceptions, and that was his first game at the varsity level.
Right, yeah.
And Douglas even said
after a lot to learn.
That he split time last year on JV, so it was a bit of a learning curve for him, and we kind of saw it not play out in real time. It's the 5th team in the country. That's kind of a nightmare scenario to make your first start. So I just thought that interview was interesting, and when Garcia comes back from the sit-out period, he'll be the guy, and we'll see if Narbonne, at least on offense, is able to improve. I'm sure they will, because then they'll start playing Marine League teams, and I don't care who the quarterback is. I could quarterback them and probably beat some Marine League teams just because of the running backs that they have.
Well, Henderson is certainly not the first rookie quarterback to get some heat from a head coach, right? The expectations are there. It's Narbonne. It's one of the best programs in California. Plenty of time to make up for it. Garcia, he's not eligible till week 5. So you have 4 games to figure it out. Try to put your name into consideration to kind of keep that job. Maybe Coach Mandy Douglas could have worded it differently, but regardless, he's kind of making it known that I'm challenging you. As of right now, my default is Jake Garcia, but as the season goes on, I may turn to you. If you can outplay him, or if you go out and you beat Long Beach Poly and really bounce back, I mean, it's more of a challenge, I think, than anything.
Yeah, and I think Coach Douglas, to your point, maybe he had a little bit higher expectations, and so maybe that is his way of kind of challenging his guy. And it's tough. He's a sophomore, but I agree with you. I think that that could be a good motivational tool, and we'll see how some guys, you know, will take the criticism, and it'll be hard for them. Other guys, they use that, and it motivates them. So it's going to be a long season for Narbonne. I'm excited to see kind of where they go from here. They play Corona Centennial eventually. That's going to be hard. Long Beach Poly this upcoming week is a tough game, so they're certainly challenging themselves earlier. And then, like a lot of the teams in the LA City section last year, they tend to get better as the year goes on. So we'll see what happens with them. Time for our game ball segment, where we highlight some of the top players in the city section from the past week. So, Alex, we talked a lot about Birmingham and how much they impressed us this past week. Who was one of the players that caught your eye and gets your game ball this week?
DJ Banks, 100 yards on the ground, 2 touchdowns. This kid's 220 pounds, and he can run. So he's going to be a load for a lot of these teams to bring down. We talked a lot about Jason Artiga, gave him plenty of love. But DJ Banks, you get my game ball this week, and I'm sure it won't be his last.
This week, I have the Reseda quarterback. His name is Dramel Rhodes. He rushed for 2 scores and a win against Monroe to help the Regents move to 1-0 on the year. Last year, Jelani Ellison and Mike Martinez were the 2 big-time players on offense for Reseda, and they both moved on. Martinez was the quarterback, Ellison was a receiver, and really specialized as a defensive back, but was great on offense as well. So the questions were, how is Reseda going to score points? Well, they're looking to some youth, and Dramel Rhodes, a sophomore, impressed in his debut. Next week, Reseda plays El Camino Real, so that's going to be 2 Division I teams, and we'll see how he fares in that one. But he gets the game ball from me this week. I was really impressed with him. Let's move on now to some picks. So we got to pick 4 games, and we got to start with Narbonne against Long Beach Poly. How do you see this one going?
I like Narbonne in this one. I think they bounced back from it. Long Beach Poly, they scored 37 points against Dorsey. They gave up a touchdown. Frankly, I think Long Beach Poly, we have them in our CIF Southern section top 10. I might bounce them out. I think Narbonne can get things rolling here. I'm picking the Gauchos.
I would pick Narbonne, but that game against Hawaii really scared me, so I'm picking Long Beach Poly. I'm just nervous about Narbonne's offense. Can they score enough points? Because I think Long Beach Poly, with the Markham twins, they're going to be getting some points on the board. They'll have a good opportunity to do that. Narbonne, I'm just worried. And Jalen Henderson was kind of rattled in that first game. I know this isn't a top 5 nationally ranked team, but how is he going to respond after that performance where, let's face it, he didn't play really well? Again, the competition won't be as good, but it's still a really talented team in Long Beach Poly. If they can get to Henderson and Narbonne can't score points, they're going to be in trouble. Game. So I like Long Beach Poly. I think it's going to be like a 24-21 close game, but give me the Jackrabbits in this one. Second game, Birmingham at LaSalle. We kind of tipped our picks with this one a little bit. I think we're both taking Birmingham, right?
I'm taking the Patriots. I mean, they got up to a good start against Harvard Westlake. We talked about LaSalle kind of being not quite exactly the toughest opponent in Southern Section. Week 3, things get a little bit tougher, but I got Patriots in this one.
Me too. I would be surprised if Birmingham lost. Venice against Harvard Westlake. Venice is hosting that game. How do you see that one? I don't know how to pick that one.
I think I might go with Harvard Westlake in this one. I know they kind of have a new coach. Programs are undergoing some changes. But like you talked about, Narbonne's offense scaring you. Venice offense scared me. I didn't see a lot from them against St. Paul. I think they do get things on track, but they didn't move the ball very well. Diamant just did not find his weapons early enough in this game, and then they kind of got buried. So I'm taking Harvard Westlake in this one.
Yeah, I'm going to agree with you. I'd take Harvard Westlake too. I know it's at Venice, and Venice will have a lot to prove after that big loss to St. Paul. But I think Harvard Westlake is probably pretty pissed off that they're the one team that lost to a city section opponent. I'm sure that's getting to them. They've heard a lot of that, and they're going to try to right that wrong against Venice this week. So I like Harvard Westlake. And on the flip side, Venice showed me nothing against St. Paul, so I don't really have a reason to pick them right now. And the last game, Reseda at El Camino Real, another really tough matchup.
Yeah, I like Alonzo Hall a lot over there at Reseda. He's one of the best defensive ends in the entire city. I don't know how the offense works at Reseda. I know you just shouted out their quarterback.
Yeah, hey.
Kid's good, but I'm taking El Camino in this one. I think I'm encouraged by the results that I saw out of Fuller last week, that they've got one of the best players over there. So give me the Conquistadors in this one.
I'm taking the Regents out of Reseda. This game, remember the game we were at last year, El Camino Real against Venice at Elko?
Yep.
That game kind of reminds me of this one a little bit. Early in the season, two good teams, El Camino Real at home, but do they have enough to get over the hump? Last year they fell just short. The game ended on that crazy goal line stand. I think this is going to be another really close game. But the best player on the team, you mentioned it, it's Philly. Alonzo Gray Hall. I think he's going to have a big impact in that game and really make it tough for El Camino Real to score. Who's going to block him?
Yeah, nobody.
I am not sure who will be able to block him in that game. And I even checked on Max Preps. This guy's catching passes as a tight end, too. So he's going to be a dual threat.
That's very dangerous.
Give me Reseda in this game. I think they win on a really, really close game because they're on the road. And El Camino Real, they're also a Division I team. So I don't think either of these teams will be in the open at the end of the year. I think they're both kind of on the outside looking in. But I like Reseda in this one. I think they have really solid Division I aspirations, and I'm not sure El Camino Real does.
Yeah, Elko's definitely got some things to prove. Last week they had a really hard time against St. Bonaventure. Key here for Elko, the depth. I think they might have more depth here than Reseda. Reseda played Monroe last week. Monroe they're not a team that you really compare yourself against if you're a Division I team. St. Bonaventure certainly is. I think by that standard, the fact that they played a team that kind of punched them up a little bit, you have that experience now of what it's like to block those kids, try to move the ball against those kids. I think El Camino just has a bigger staff at this point. I'm picking the Conquistadors.
All right, we'll agree to disagree. That will do it for the LA City section. Week 0 wrap-up, Week 1 preview, whatever you want to call it. For Alex Scar, I'm Connor Morissette. We'll be here all season. See you next time.